Welcome, bent riders around the world. My name is Gary Solomon, and you're watching the Laid-Back Bike Report.
Come on. There we go.
And we're coming to you live from the Laid-Back Bike Studios in Pickerington, Ohio, where we broadcast monthly, usually on the first or second Sunday of the month. As soon as this live webcast is over, it's going to be archived on YouTube, as it always is. The live webcast is available on Google+, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and on our website. Our website is the laidbackbikereport.com. It's laidbackbikereport.com. And you'll be able to find not only the live webcast as we're doing now, but past webcasts and a list of the future webcasts. So if you head over there at any time, you'll be able to keep up with what's going on at the Laid-Back Bike Report. If you'd like to make a comment during the show today, and we really encourage you to do that, it makes the report much more interesting when you guys are joining us and we see your comments and questions. You can do that in a couple of ways. If you're on Twitter, you can use the hashtag #LaidBackBikeReport. If you are on Google+, you can just make your comment on the comment page of the event page. You can just leave a comment right there. We'll see that. And if you're watching anywhere else on Facebook or the website, you can click through on that viewer where it says YouTube in the lower right side. You go to the YouTube page and just leave a comment below where the program is showing, and we'll be able to see that and hopefully bring those questions and comments to our guest or any of our panelists. So. Here's how our webcast goes. It's broken down into 5 sections. There's a presentation and interview of our special guest. Today we'll just have an interview. We're going to have usually the Recumbent News Report from the Laid-Back News Desk, Recumbent Sports Report, which is new this month, from the Laid-Back Sports Desk. We'll have an open question and answer period from the audience, and that's you guys. And then we'll do a short segment on the Google+ Recumbent Bike Rider community and let you know what's going on with them. So let's go ahead and then introduce the panelists we have with us this month. First, we have Travis Preble, who's the founder and editor of Recumbent Journal and Recumbent TV. He works part-time for RBR, and that's a recumbent shop in State College, Pennsylvania. He's also the esteemed anchor of our Laid-Back News Desk. Travis has had a little issue at home this month, and we're lucky to have him with us. He's not going to be able to do that news report today, but he's with us as a trooper that he is to help us out today. So thanks a lot, Travis, and welcome.
I do apologize for not having a news report this month. As Gary said, right now my entire basement where I'm currently sitting smells like sewage because we recently discovered we have, well, a bit of a problem. But by next month, everything will be cleared up, and I won't be wrinkling my nose so much, and we'll get a proper report. So sorry about that.
No problem, Travis. No problem for us. It's a big one for you. So, and at the end of the report, if we have a little extra time, we'll have you go into excruciating detail on what's actually going on there.
Yeah, let's not.
Next, we have Carl Kidd. Carl's the moderator of the Bent Society of Southern Florida community on Google+. And Carl is instrumental in helping me produce this webcast and handles our live comments and a bunch of other stuff. So, welcome, Carl.
Hi, Gary. Welcome from South Florida.
Yeah, sounds good. All right. We usually have Lars Kamm from Germany with us. Lars is actually on a trip with his Velomobile. He's doing, I don't know, a couple hundred miles or something, and he wasn't going to be able to make it back in time to do the show with us. So we miss you, Lars, and we hope to see you again next month. I'm thinking you probably will be back. So, and then lastly, we have our newest member of the panel, Denny Voorhees. Denny's been a recumbent rider for many years, frequent contributor on many of the online bent forums. He comes to us from Sayre, Pennsylvania, and
Yeah, right
is
on
our
the
new
border.
anchor of the Laidback Sports Desk. Good afternoon, Denny.
Hey, how you doing there, guys? Good to see you.
Very nice to have you with us, and looking forward to your report a little bit later on there. So, all right. So, without further ado, let's move on to our very special guest of the month. Our guest has had a hand in the early days of the American recumbent news efforts and design. He was involved in one way or another with Recumbent Cyclist News, the RAND's VREX, Angletex MC2, the Barcroft Dakota, and now with Bacchetta. So our special guest today is Mark Colliton, the recumbent pioneer and co-owner of Bacchetta Bikes. So welcome, Mark.
Hey guys, how's it going?
It's nice to have you with us today. We're going to ask you a few questions and see if we can get to know you and what went on in the recumbent history here that maybe some of us aren't so familiar with. So let's start, if we can, with a little personal question. Can you tell us where you're from, Mark?
Originally from Washington, D.C., and grew up out in the suburbs just north of town, and lived there most of my life. Spent a few years in Boston, but I've been down here in St. Petersburg for the last 10 years or so.
Okay. Now, when did you start riding bikes in general?
Oh, as a kid, I have 4 brothers, so we had a house full of bikes, and I got to be the house mechanic, which allowed me to steal all their parts off of their bikes. And
so that's kind of how you got started then, with regular bikes and being a kid and playing around with them.
Yeah, basically.
Okay. So, and tell me a little bit about your schooling.
What part of my schooling do you want to know about?
Well, let's start with kindergarten. No, it's not necessarily go by, like where'd you go to high school and did college and that kind of thing?
Went to a regular public high school out in Rockville, Maryland. Went to Perry High. Went to community college for a couple of years, and then went down to Florida State actually for a year. And then I decided I was just not cut out for college, so I picked up stakes and moved back to D.C., where I ran into an old buddy of mine on the 4th of July, 76 or something. And then he was like, "You should come to work for me in Boston." So I did that for a couple of years. And
what was that work?
Yeah.
What kind of work was that?
That was back in the pre-press days before computers. So it was darkroom work, pre-press. Just getting stuff ready to go to the stripper and the pressman for printing.
All right. Well, we'll leave the stripper out of the conversation, and probably
those
nobody.
Very highly paid strippers, by the way.
Nobody knows what any of those things are. I'm sure the younger generation has no clue. So let's talk a little bit now about how you actually came into the recumbent world. How did that meeting occur? Where did that first happen?
Well, at the time, this is like probably in the late 80s, maybe 1990. I was working at another pre-press type of operation, typesetting house in Washington, D.C., photo lettering, another thing that nobody knows anything about anymore. And I had read an article in a Parade magazine, actually, about recumbents, and I had seen them around over the years but never really pursued it. And that article was written by a guy named Vic Sussman, and he actually he was a Washingtonian. He actually only lived about a mile away from me, and I tracked him down, and we started talking, and I just really got interested again. I joined before RCN started. There was an actual Recumbent Club of America. Denny, do you remember that?
No, I don't remember that. It's a little bit before
that was
my time.
actually something Dick Ryan started, and it was basically you just signed up for a list. You gave people your name and number, where you lived and what bikes you owned, and they shared it amongst the club members. via mail, snail mail, and this is and Dick doing a newsletter back then. It was just too much for him to do and build bikes. So Bob Bryant took it over. He was looking to get into the business, and so I met Bob through that. And when I started getting his newsletter, or the early RCN, I was like, this guy really needs some help with some type. So he was basically just typing stuff up on a typewriter, and then cutting and pasting it, and then taking it down to the print shop and having them print that. So
okay, so so I wanted to get into Bob Bryant because that's a huge part of a lot of us who started checking things in the recumbent scene back in those days, and for a lot of years after that was the Recumbent Cyclist News. And so when you got a chance to meet Bob and he offered you a job working at RCN. Is that how that?
Oh no. Bob was actually selling. He was doing the newsletter, which eventually turned into the magazine, and he was also selling bikes at the time out of his garage. This is, I have to say that was 1990, and a lot of people were doing stuff like that. So you could just call him up and talk to him about bikes. We, just wound up hitting it off and talk bikes for hours and hours. And I just offered him my services. I said, look, I can set your headline type for you. And then eventually, I started doing his pictures for him as well. That used to be done in a big, commercial camera as well. It had to be, you had to make halftones to make
so
it.
I'm guessing that that was maybe an introduction into meeting some other people in the recumbent world at the time, and maybe checking out some bikes. Did that give you that opportunity?
Oh yeah, Bob and I became pretty good friends, and then he invited me out to go to we were going down. We went to the last show, Interbike show that was in L.A. or Anaheim, and so I flew out to Seattle, and we drove down to Anaheim. Along the way, we stopped at a couple of places, Corvallis, stopped to meet Dick Ryan because he had moved his operation out there, and gosh, by the time we got down to Anaheim, we had, run into Gardner Martin and a few other people that were, in the business back then. Guys at Angletech, Dale and Kelvin Clark, their shop was really something back then. So all the early guys in the recumbent world that were on the West Coast, we seemed to meet them on that trip. So
that was the beginning of your interaction with all those guys and really starting to get into the scene.
Yeah, and actually that was on that trip down to Anaheim is when I met John Schlitter, who was at the show for Rands.
Right. And I want to get into that. Let me just, if we could just back up a little bit here. I was wondering, as we get into those stories of you starting to design a few bikes and that sort of thing, I was wondering, so you met all these guys on this trip. Was this a huge influence on your ideas about building recumbent bikes at this time, or was it is this just a start to you thinking about it?
Well, the thing was, back then, you didn't have very many choices, so most of the market was dominated by long wheelbase two-wheelers, and there were a couple of short wheelbase bikes available, a Counterpoint Presto and a Lightning P38. There was a Turner short wheelbase bike, all very different in a lot of ways, but like everybody else, I wanted to try everything. You couldn't try everything. It was really hard, so you wind up buying bikes and trying them and selling them, and then you realize what you really want is not really available. So,
and that I guess brings us.
Then you like everybody else in the recumbent world, you just get the napkin out and start drawing.
Right, and that's exactly where I was headed now. So let's move along to the VREX story if we can, and Rand. So you were beginning to tell me about how you met John Schlitter. Can you go ahead and talk a little bit about how that encounter started?
Well, I think year or so before I met John, I had purchased a rolling frame set from a guy in Washington, used a Stratus, and I wound up building it up and riding it, but I just had this feeling that I wanted to ride a short wheelbase bike, and I had started experimenting with those, and after building a couple of home brews, I just said that this is crazy. I need to come up with something better than this, and I wound up buying a Counterpoint Presto, which I didn't really fall in love with. I bought a P38, which I really liked once I got it set up, and then I had this Stratus in the basement, and I was thinking, this would be so easy to turn into a short wheelbase. So I did some drawings, and when I was in Anaheim at Interbike, I started talking to John a little bit about it. He said, well, go ahead and send me the drawings. I asked them if they would consider building a private label bike, and they said, sure. They weren't really interested in a short wheelbase bike. So eventually I did send him the drawings, and encouraged by Bob Bryan at the time, and even though he was sort of a dyed-in-the-wool long wheelbase guy, he was very influential in encouraging me to do that. And it took a while to talk John sort of into the idea as well, but they were basically kind of up for something. The Recumbent was kind of stagnant at the time, and personally I just saw a huge hole in the market for a decent short wheelbase bike that didn't cost $2,000.
Right. Okay, so you did put together a design for VREX, and they accepted this right away, or they wanted to work on it a little bit, and how did that come about? What happened with the VREX?
Well, after the drawing, eventually they got a prototype made. Bad thing it was during this time, John. The old 451 700. Yeah, and unfortunately, during that process, John was in a motorcycle accident and was laid up for a while, so he couldn't really test ride the bike. Eventually, he recovered, and he called me up, said, "Look, I got a bike made. What do you think?" And I was like, "Well, I'll fly out there and take a look and give it a ride and see what it's all about." And I did. I flew out on July 4th weekend, I think, and it's very similar to the bike that I rode right there.
So now you saw this bike you kind of designed, and then they had made a few modifications to it. Were you still pleased with what you saw there, or would you have liked it to have been just what you started out with, or?
Well, I was really surprised with the way the process went, to tell you the truth. They built a prototype. I rode it, and John had been riding it, and gosh, I was like, I just wanted to design bikes, and I was hoping, once they built this thing, they would see the righteousness of it, and would just, would take off with it. And they liked it. So I said, well, why don't you take it? I have some ideas that that need to be fixed. I don't think it's right to go. But they started building them right away, and
now the VREX was a pretty successful bike. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, that orange frame hanging up over my head is the #2 frame.
Oh, okay. Why don't you? Can you tilt your screen up just a little bit? We can just see there you go. Okay, so that was the second one ever built.
Second frame ever built. And I actually had them add these, some extra canty posts and brake bosses so I could change wheels and try different things on it. And that actually has a 24-inch road fork in it, because that's the way I wound up riding it in the end. A dual 24. It's one of Rich Pinto's old Aero cycles on the other side there.
Okay. All right. Well, good. Yeah. So now that bike became very popular for Renz. I know. Did it take off right away, and were you real pleased with the way that went?
Oh, it was hugely successful. Yeah. The big thing was, you know, I took the second frame and started messing around with the wheels, and eventually stumbled onto the geometry that really worked. And you know, it took a couple of years for John to work that into the production, but they eventually did. Stretched out the wheelbase a little bit, came up, and then they eventually settled on a 406 559 wheel setup. And that's really the bike that we built for years. The early ones were a little sketchy and I think a little twitchy, but they were still a great little bike for, like I said, it slipped into the market at the right price at the right time. And yeah, I think they sold 150 bikes the year before. Stratuses and Nimbus is what they were making. And I think the first year they made that bike, they sold 300 of them. So they were off and running.
Big step, yeah. Now we want to go more into a couple of the other bikes you worked on, but if I read correctly, you continued to experiment with adding larger wheels to the front and kind of balancing that out. Was that at that time, or has this come much later that you started? Because this is part of the evolution to where you ended up, I know. But yeah. How did that come about?
Well, I've always been sort of enamored with 24-inch wheels, so I started messing around with those because I had a set of wheels, and I just liked the idea of the bike, the symmetry, and the way it looked. So I always thought recumbents looked very, kludgy, and this didn't look like they were put together very well. I mean, from a visual standpoint. So, fixing the wheels and cleaning up the frame were a big thing for me, and I met a couple of guys along the way that were, of similar mind. A guy named Warren Berger, who lives in Central Virginia. It was the first big-wheeled guy I ever ran into in the recumbent world, and he was great. He was riding a V-Rex, and when I told him I went up to, now there's a picture. Are you just trying to distract me?
How's it working so far? Is that working for you?
What? Oh gosh, I was like, yeah. So just a quick segue, since he's got this picture up here. That's John on the left, me on the right, and my brother-in-law, Mark Swanson, who was actually the guy who sowed the seed for Bacchetta bikes starting up, and that's a pretty good story. But if you want.
We're gonna get to that. Yeah, let's back up a little bit. So, okay. There's a couple of moments here I want to go over before we kind of get into what happens with Bacchetta. So, at some point or other, you were involved with the MC2 and Angletech, and you talked about Kelvin a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. My big thing back then is that I wanted to be a bike designer, and I never wanted to start a business at all. So I'd given the V-Rex to Rands. I said, look, you guys are willing to build it, you can have it. What I'm really interested in is, developing projects and getting into the industry as a designer. And I really thought that might happen with Rands, but, I was a little naive at the time, and I realized later on that the recumbent business is a very small world, and the guys that actually get into the business, from a building aspect, are usually designers and enthusiasts themselves, and there's very little room for outsiders to sort of come in. So I don't know where I was going with that Shaggy Dog story, but
we're talking about Angletech and Kelvin.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Anyway,
myself, if I don't have a script here, I'd be wandering off to the hinterlands right now, I'm sure.
So the thing with Rands just it didn't pan out, and I was like, oh, I was kind of bummed out about it, but I had a job, I didn't work, I hadn't quit anything to go build bikes, and like I said, I had met Kelvin and Dale Clark, and had known them for years, and then just through my association with RCN and Bob Bryant, we had kept in touch. And when Kelvin moved down to Colorado, he was looking to he was doing a lot of specialty bikes and special needs bikes way before anybody else. And one of the projects he wanted was a short wheelbase of his own. And he called me up one day and said, "Hey, do you want to design a bike?" I said, "Well, I've got plenty of designs, so I'll send you one that I really like, and we'll just go from there." He had a builder, Paul Nobilette, I think, that was really good, brazing, old school frame builder. And yeah, so that project went very smoothly. I designed a couple of things that have been incorporated into the Bacchetta stuff, the shaped tube for the top tube, and the sliding Delrin clamp that came.
Okay, so that was all part of the foundation, a little bit of an
Right.
education for you. How about Bill Cook and Barcroft? What was your association with him about?
Well, that was the other great thing. Initially, going back to that parade article in the Washington Post.
Actually, I don't think we talked about that. Tell me a little bit about that. I did have that in my notes.
When I first started thinking about recumbents again. I'd seen them years and years ago when I was working in Boston, actually in Cambridge, and I used to see. I saw a guy would drive down through Harvard Square, and I don't know if anybody has ever been into Harvard Square. It's a madhouse of traffic and pedestrians and cars. And back in the mid-'70s, it was even worse. It was just total insanity. And I would get off of work around 5:30 and walk up through the square, and this guy would be riding down through the square in 3 or 4 lanes of crazy traffic, and he was on a recumbent. And I was just totally fascinated by that, and I just love the bike. And it turns out that was David Gordon Wilson from MIT, and he lived in Cambridge in Harvard Square, and he would ride from MIT down, through the square on his way home, and I was just blown away by that bike. And
Is this a bike that he created himself?
Oh, that was the bike that it was designed in one of his classes. Actually, I think one of his graduate student classes was given the assignment to redesign the bike and make it safer to ride. And eventually they, came to recumbents, and he really wanted a super safe bike. So they wound up with under-seat steering and a long wheelbase bike. Gosh, what was the name of it? And then they eventually, I think Dick Ryan, that's how Dick Ryan got involved. He built those bikes when they went into production with the De Felice, I think is the name of it.
And then the Parade magazine part of this, was that an article on this? Is that what it was?
Yeah, that was an article by this guy, Vic Sussman. Didn't I say that earlier?
Yeah, you might have. Maybe I'm going off here. Right?
Anyway,
yeah.
Vic Sussman, he wrote this article. It got me, all of a sudden I was like, oh, there's this club you can join. That was the club that
you did talk about that.
Started. And
okay, so let's get our way back to Bill Cook.
All right, so the guy that wrote the article was this guy named Vic Sussman, and for years he worked at the Washington Post, but then he started freelancing for Parade and other magazines, and got to know him. A good buddy of his was Bill Cook, who was also a tech writer at the Washington Post, and Vic Sussman and another friend of his had a recumbent, and they were like, yeah, we ride every Saturday morning in Rock Creek Park. If you show up at 8 o'clock, we'll be there. And I was like, oh, great. So I got my bike and went down there and met them, and it was the 3 of us, riding in Rock Creek Park, and that was the beginning of a rider group called Whirl, Washington's something crazy acronym. But that ride is still going on today, I think, every Saturday morning. And over the course of a couple of years, that group grew to about 20 or 30 regular riders. And because it was back then, it was like motorcycles. If you saw a motorcycle, you'd wave. People would stop in the park and talk. There was no internet, so that's why you met people who had recumbents people, by word of mouth started showing up for this ride, and Bill Cook, started talking to Sussman about it, and then so he started showing up at the ride, and one of the first bikes that he had built in his garage was a clone of a V-Rex, and we started talking, because we'd go to breakfast after the ride, and I started talking to Bill, and I said, if you like to build bikes, which he really did, I said, I have a lot of other designs. Why don't you start messing around with them rather than just, cloning this, V-Rex? And he's like, oh, okay. So we started up a conversation about that. Eventually, I had a basic design, and we started talking about it. And he got a CAD program, started drawing it, and that bike turned into the Dakota, which was the first bike that bought Croft.
And that was very, I don't know how well it sold, but I know it was very well received. I remember reading a lot of people's articles about how much they loved their Dakotas. And,
right.
And
well, that bike really incorporated a lot of the things that I had learned over the years. And, the single monotube frame and the wheelbase was the big thing. If you have a 20-inch front wheel, you really have to extend that wheelbase out to, just to calm down the handling. That was the problem with all short wheelbase. Back in the early 90s, you had short wheelbase bikes that were, had 36-inch wheelbase, or, at the most about 38 or 39 inches. And they were, just because of that short wheelbase with the small front wheel, they were just extremely sketchy and quick handling. So over the years, we just, kept building designs that would stretch that wheelbase out. What we found is once you get it out over 45 inches, it really starts to handle like a dream, actually.
All right, so speaking of handling like a dream, let's move along to the Bacchetta story, right?
Okay.
So you started talking a little bit earlier about your brother-in-law and John Schlitter and Hornberger, and getting that little bit of a big wheel design in there. So let's talk a little bit now about the beginnings of Bacchetta and that design, if we could. How did you get there?
Well, like I said, Warren was the guy that started me thinking about big wheels, and we were pursuing it on our own. We had a common bicycle dealer in our area that we would go to just to look at bikes and mess around. And every once in a while I'd run into Warren at either at the shop or at an event. And then, we just eventually started riding big wheel bikes and changing the handlebars around, and there started to be a lot of talk about it in the recumbent world. So Bob Bryant called me up one day. He said, look, why don't you do an article about, big wheeled recumbents, short wheelbase bikes? And I said, yeah, that sounds cool. He said, oh, and by the way, you should talk to this guy up in New Hampshire named Rich Pinto. So he gave me Rich Pinto's number, and I called him up, and I just asked him one question about big wheel bikes, and he just took off talking about a mile a minute for about an hour. I was like, wow, I gotta go meet this guy face to face. And he was building these aerocycles up here, over here, which was basically a knockoff. Huh?
That picture.
I'm sorry.
Here, let's help you out. How about that?
Oh, there's an aerocycle right there. Yeah, so this bike is essentially a square tube version of a King Cycle. The King Cycle was a English bike made by the Kingsbury family, I think. But they had and it was a very cool little bike, and Rich really liked it, and Warren was a big fan of it. I was a huge fan of it, just for a lot of reasons. It was simple, and it was clean line. It was pretty fast. Even though they ran it with they had this really weird wheel set on a 24-inch in the back and a English 18-inch wheel in the front. So it was really didn't fit very well in the market here. But each of us in our time had made our way to Larry Black's shop up in Mount Airy, Maryland, and test rode one of the bikes. And we went on our merry way, thinking, yeah, this is it, almost it. And so Rich was the guy that I finally met up with that was actually building big wheeled bikes production-wise. So when I'll come back to Rich in a minute. When John and I tried one more time to get a job at Rand's as a designer, and actually flew out to Kansas, and eventually had a meeting with Randy, and it just didn't work out. So I went back and I told John, I said, look, if you ever leave Rand's, we had a pretty good working experience together with the V-Rex. I said, I'll shop us around as a design team, design and production. And he said, okay, if that ever happens, that sounds good. So, we talked to a lot of different people, talked to Vision, talked to Burley at the time, even talked to Gardner Martin, guys that were not, had the capability, but just weren't building what we thought was a bike that would fit in the market. And eventually, John left Rand's, like for the second time, I think, and that was it. He said, I'm never going back. And I was like, all right, cool. I'll start shopping us around in earnest. So that never worked out for us in any way, shape, or form, one or the other. But another connection through Bob Bryant put somebody in touch with me that was looking to buy a current manufacturer of recumbents. And he was putting together a group of people. They were looking for a designer/production person. And I said, well, and we had a very nice conversation about it. I said, look, I don't have any production experience. I have a lot of design experience, but if you're really looking for a production guy, you should, talk to John. So I put him in touch with John. John said, well, I don't have a lot of design experience. I have a lot of production experience. So if you're really looking for a designer, you should talk to Mark. And eventually, we wound up at a meeting in Kansas City together as a team with 3 or 4 or 5 other guys that were interested in. They were trying to pull together some investors as well. And at the time, my brother-in-law had successfully started a .com and sold it, made a lot of money. And he was in between things. I said, well, can you fly into Kansas City for this meeting and let me know what you think of this whole thing? And he did, and we spent the whole day in a meeting talking about it. And at the end of the day, John and Mark and myself were, just went off on our own. And he said, look, this deal's just never going to happen, and there's too much money involved, and it's too top-heavy. And he said, but you guys should just start your own business. And John and I looked at each other and just went, well, that's easily said, but neither of us had any money. Both of us, were working. We had families, kids in school, so there's no quitting jobs to go, run off and build bikes. So, but my brother-in-law was, kind of insistent, and he said, I think you really have something going here. And I had already designed a couple of bikes that were in the Bacchetta way of thinking, and he pledged some money for the whole startup. And basically, he said, I'll put this X amount of money towards starting you up, and but you have to be at Interbike next year with prototypes. That's the goal. And so we were like, oh, okay, that's easy. But so John had started a bike shop in his hometown of Hayes, and so there was a place to work. And he also had a lot of connections with guys that used to work at Rand's, a welder and a CAD guy. So, and they were no longer working at Rand's. So I eventually quit my job, and in the spring, I guess, of 2000, and started commuting back and forth from Hayes to build these prototypes. And
This was all to get ready for Interbike. That this was the crunch time kind of thing, right?
Right. And
okay, and is Rich into the scene at this point or not? Rich Pinto.
Well, Rich and I have been talking all along, and when we got the money to, the basic to start the company, I said, look, I know this guy, Rich Pinto, and he's got a great idea, and he really, Rich is just a brilliant guy, and he knows all the science and physics behind go fast bikes. And I had talked to him. I said, look, we're going to start this company. I'm going to build a bike. We're going to build a Strada, which is basically what we did, a big wheeled bike, and a Giro, which was the Giro that you see today. And I told him, I said, look, I know you're going to build it. You're looking to build a monotube frame out of titanium. And he's like, yes, that's in the works. I said, well, get one. If you can get one to Interbike, this fall, I'd like you to join the company. And I think, I knew he was going to do it, and I knew it was going to be great. And
okay, so let's bring it together here. So tell me the story at Interbike now. So you've got all the guys together. You've had the designs. You got Rich going. So what happened at Interbike?
We showed up at Interbike, and unfortunately, that was in 2001, the fall of 2001, and the World Trade Center. So buildings came down. We were all set to go to Interbike, and everything was off. You couldn't fly. Nobody wanted. They shut down Vegas basically. They shut down the convention center, and we thought, well, that's it. We're not going to. There isn't going to be an Interbike this year. And luckily for us, the Interbike people said, we're going to do the show, and if you're willing to open up the convention center, whoever shows up, and we'll just live with it. And so we loaded up, a big trailer full of stuff and drove down there and set up our booth. And we had a pretty good reaction from a lot of people that we knew in the industry for years. Some dealers and stuff were kind of standoffish and were taking a wait and see attitude. We were a new outfit with new designs. Back then, these big wheeled bikes with high bottom brackets were, considered extremely radical designs. Actually, even the Giro 20 was considered a high bottom bracket bike back in the late 90s and early 2000s. So, we got enough orders to start up. We eventually signed Rich. Rich came down. We saw his bike for the first time, his new titanium bike, and said, great, bring it to the booth tomorrow. We'll sign the papers at dinner tonight. So he signed on as a partner. That was the bike he brought to the party. So
that bike became
the Thai Arrow.
Okay.
So, yeah, that picture you just saw was an early Thai Arrow. Yeah.
Right. I thought that was Rich. Is that Rich right there?
Yeah, that was.
Okay, I was pretty sure that's what that was. Okay, super.
His head doesn't look very big in that picture though, but
it's a Photoshop thing.
I think they did shrink.
We made the Bicycle Man head big and his small just for effect. And okay, so let's move along to the current Bacchetta. Let's talk a little bit about your models here. Let me real quick here. I want to show that one again real quick. There's what we were talking about. You showed that a little bit earlier. So, all right. So now we're going to jump. I guess. Let me go back to Mark here first. You've got a few models in the line. But even before we talk to that, what exactly is your title and your current duties with Bacchetta right now? What are you doing right now?
I do all the designing and specifications for bikes and oversee the production of our bikes. and clean the toilets, answer the phone.
So
Everybody here is
so
on.
you had no you had no previous experience in production. Evidently, you've gotten the experience in production and toilet cleaning as well, which is, I mean, those are two really handy things to have. Mark.
Everybody thinks Bacchetta is some big, mega shop, but it's really a very small operation and always has been. For the last 6 or 7 years, it's really been Mike Wilkerson, who heads up our sales department, but really does everything as well. Outside of design and production, Jeremy Massey, who is, our numbers guy. He's our accountant and bookkeeper, shipping master, ordering master, and then there's myself. Those are the 3 full-time people. Rich is involved with the company, but not in the office. So he's basically handling events and the team stuff when we have an event that they want to go to. So
okay.
For that, John was actually our production guy early on, but it really did involve travel. We'd go to Taiwan once or twice a year. That became a real burden on him and his family. So I started going with him, and we actually have a very, early on we had, fits and starts with our agent there. We switched agents one year when we wound up being stuck in Taiwan for a month trying to get things running correctly. And ever since we switched our agent, we've been with them for probably 10 years now. Things have gone a lot smoother. It's a lot easier to communicate, and things get done. So they really handle the production. And
okay. So, and then when John left the company, you took over whatever was left over of the production, and that's what you're doing right now.
Well, I've actually been doing the production for almost, for 10 years, because John sort of backed himself out of the company as he was, doing more and more racing and event stuff. So,
okay. Let's talk about
into something else, completely.
Right. Let's talk about your bikes. Probably the headliner bike is the Carbon Arrow 2.0 that people see all the time. That beautiful bike. Can you tell us a little bit about the how that came about and how it's doing?
Well, it's really the culmination of Rich's design over the years. The titanium tube that we'd still be building tie bikes if we could get the tube, but we lost the tubing. To produce it is just way beyond our means, and so eventually we started looking at carbon. We did a carbon bike with a stateside manufacturer, and that really just didn't work out very well. It just I don't know what to say. Luckily, they never were able to produce them in any kind of numbers. So eventually, we just had to break off that association and start from scratch again. And we were lucky to find a big-time carbon manufacturer in Taiwan that is very willing to work with small companies, which is really unusual these days. Basically, unless you're building thousands of frames, they don't want to talk to you. But these guys are great, and luckily, again, I have to knock on wood. My agent had actually gone to school with this guy, and they've remained friends over the years. And I think he really developed, actually did a big favor by taking us on. And to a large degree, his design and engineering teams worked with Rich with this on this frame. So they're really as responsible as anybody for the latest Carbon 2.0 frame.
Okay.
So, which we really loved. It's just a great bike all the way around.
Yeah, I know it's renowned at this point and loved by racers and a lot of people who don't race just like that bike, and it's a beautiful bike. So, all right, let's move along a little. We don't want to run out of time here, and I've got a number of questions remaining here. The one item in your line that kind of stands out to me is the Bella, as it's quite a different bike. Well, it's a long wheelbase and kind of goes away from where you were headed. Was it something you felt like you needed to do to complete the line, or can you tell us a little bit the story with the of the Bella?
Well, well, we had a strong background there, with John at Rands with a Stratus. I actually owned a Stratus and a number of other long wheelbase bikes when I first got into recumbents. So it wasn't a foreign thing to us. But one of the things that we felt we needed to do for our dealers was to flesh out the line a little bit and give them a bike that they could sell in that market, in that segment of the market, and give it to them at a very good price. That's the other thing. I mean, long wheelbase bikes had become extremely expensive. You couldn't get one under, like $2,300, and we were like, that's crazy. We can build a bike for a lot less than that. So when I went back, I wanted to raise the bottom bracket up and figure out the front end handling a little bit, and I think we did a good tweak in that regard. So we added the bike mostly for our dealers, and we thought there was a hole in the market for a long wheelbase bike that that would last.
That makes some sense. So that kind of brings me to my next kind of series of questions here about maybe future models, what you might be thinking about. So fleshing out your line, as I spent a great deal of time talking to a lot of the manufacturers at the Recumbent CycleCon a couple of weeks ago, and it seems obvious to me, and talking to them, that trikes are just taking over the recumbent world. Not that there's not a place for two-wheel bikes, of course. Do you guys have any notions of getting into trikes, for instance?
You know what? I get asked that question a lot, but for the most part, no. It's a market that's very well served by the manufacturers that are in it now, and they've basically divided that market up. I mean, Cat Trike, Ice, and Terra Trike, they basically own that market, and we don't see a really good entry point. Plus, we don't know what we'd bring to the table. To be perfectly honest with you,
sure.
We don't have a trike guy here. So
okay, right. How about the other thing that stands out? Maybe tandem.
I still got a couple of tandem prototypes sitting up in the warehouse, but
they'll be up there for a while. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, probably. It's just a market that's just so tiny.
Yeah.
We might build something. But we'd probably build it stateside and find somebody local to build it. But
okay.
It's just not a market that we're.
Well, you being the design guy, I guess the last question in this series here. So, do you have some designs in your head? That's something I haven't talked about. What is it that you think you may go to next?
That's a good question. There are some trike things that we've actually built a couple trike prototypes. Working with Mick Sims out of Australia and a couple of other people that out of the West Coast. I really kind of like tilting trikes that let the bike lean and steer. I'm not a big fan of super low trikes, basically because you can't take them on the road. So I don't really see us going in that direction. Tandems I don't really see either. What we're trying to do is, build two-wheel bikes that we want to ride, and hopefully other people want to ride, and make them, more versatile and less expensive. And
well, that sounds like that's a good way to do it. I'd say if you can put that together, you have more winners, I'm sure. All right, I've got a couple, 3 questions here that were sent to me that pertain to Bacchetta. First, from Constance, she wrote into the website and said, ask Mark if he has considered building a bike for a 5'1" woman. The recumbent bikes seem to be only for taller folks, at least 5'4". I often see a Giro for sale by a woman because it's just a little bit too big. What do you think, Mark?
Well, it's really hard to, that's a tough market to build for, and I know a couple of designs that fit that market well, but you wind up going to 16-inch wheel in the front. You keep a big wheel in the back, but I don't think it really visually just is not, and it's an unappealing bike. It's a very difficult nut to crack, I think. I've been trying for years, but
Something
yeah,
that you thought of.
the only way to do it would be to shorten the boom up and put smaller wheels on the bike. Like a 1620. It's just not a good choice in any way, shape, or form. S frames or Z frames, do address that, but even those bikes have their problems when you start bending the main tube.
Okay.
No, I don't have any good answers, to tell you the truth.
Here's a question from John Rossignol, one of the members on my Google Plus group. When you're talking to the Bacchetta guys, which I guess that's you, Mark, on the Laid-Back Bike Report, ask who picks out their colors.
we throw darts at a chart, basically. No, I've picked them for years, but it's never just my choice. It's like everybody here has something to say about it. And like everybody else in the world, I love green. I hate green. It's the story of bikes through the centuries, I guess.
Right. Everybody's got their own favorite. And
when it comes to color, everybody's got their favorites, and there's basically white, black, red, yellow, blue. So if you go outside of those bike norms, yellow is a pretty good color that most people find neutral and serves as a visual standout as well, so you don't disappear in traffic. But other than that, I mean, every year we start talking about color, it turns into a 2-week argument around.
Those you don't need, I'm sure. So, all right, here's the last question that was sent to me also by the website. The first part of it has to do with what we've already talked about a little bit about trikes and would you consider all that kind of stuff. But at the end, he talks about the fact that it seems as though two-wheeled recumbent sales are diminishing to some extent. And would there be a point of manufacturers of two-wheeled bikes collaborating on some things? Specifically, he talks about maybe a seat. I understand the brand specific seats can be a point of differentiation, but a seat specifically designed for the lower bottom bracket of a long wheel base bike that was shared between, say, Rands and Bacchetta. Would you foresee something like that ever happening?
Oh, sure. I can see that happening somewhere down the road. It's amazing how many people are still trying to get into the two-wheeled market. As many trikes that are getting sold, there are still more two-wheeled manufacturers out there than there are trike manufacturers. Mm-hmm. So I don't know why people are jumping into the market. It's really a depressed market at this point. I think the market swings back and forth, but it's certainly that trike market was just on a 5-year run that they were doubling sales every year. But I can see cooperation. Well, we're certainly open to that kind of conversation. Most people don't want to get into it, though. They have their priorities, or our seat's great. It's hard.
Right, keeping it close to the vest, I think, is some of their ideas. That I don't know if I mentioned that was from John Riley via my website. So you know who that is?
I exchange emails with John Riley all the time because he is the princess and the pea of seats, and all his feedback that I've gotten over the years has been great. He's just, and every point he makes is valid. There's really, most seats are so expensive to produce that it's hard to go into production with minimum numbers. So, maybe the new Rand manufacturing, but their old seats were made in Taiwan. You had to build, probably 200 at a time. So that's a lot of inventory to carry. And seats are not cheap. The seats that we build, and I'm sure the Rand's seats, they cost as much to build as a bike frame and a fork. So.
Very good. All right, let me move on to Bacchetta Racing, Team Bacchetta. Can you tell us a little bit about, just briefly, if you would, Mark, what the history of Bacchetta, Team Bacchetta was, and what's going on with it today?
That was always, Rich and John's thing. There really is very little activity. We have guys that are still participating in the team, but I don't know. The whole racing scene seems to have slacked off over the last few years, mostly because the ultra racing is difficult to maintain that kind of training schedules and the amount of time that gets invested in it. Even if you're a diehard enthusiast racer, marathon racing takes a lot out of you. And I think what guys, people get in and out of it, they're into it hard for 2 or 3 years, and then you realize, wow, this is just a ton of work and a lot of time.
Okay.
So,
yeah, I know Denny's going to have a bit to say on that in a little bit here too, so we'll get back to that. But yeah, no question about that. All right, let's get to a couple final questions, maybe bigger ones. Maybe you've already answered this, but who would you say is the biggest influence on you as far as your ideas in the recumbent world? Who's the biggest influence?
Gosh, I have to say, there's a guy that is a part-timer up at Wheel and Sprocket, named is Mark Arians, and I've gotten to know him over the years, and he's a very thoughtful and just creative mind. And a lot of the things that he's just been in the recumbent world for years. Wheel and Sprocket has been around for years. They're an early adapter as a dealer. They had recumbents in a big way long before anybody else did. And that guy, over the years, and he's still a good friend of mine, really gave me a lot of great ideas, along with Warren Berger, very influential to me, and in the last 15 years, Rich Pinto, without a doubt. From the design aspect and why bikes, go fast or why they handle a certain way, has really influenced my thinking that way. So.
Fair enough. All right, last question. What would you like to add? Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I left out that seems important to you?
Wow. Now, the only thing I have left to say is I really want to thank you for having me on, but I want to say it was really good to see Denny's face. I haven't seen him in years. I'd really like to thank Carl for wearing the colors today, showing his B jersey, and Travis, I'm feeling for you, brother. When the plumbing goes bad, it's never a good thing. So
I appreciate the sympathy. I really do.
Really good luck. So
yeah, usually it's a urologist called in when the plumbing goes bad. No. So when it comes to guys our age, I'm happy for Travis. Not that he's a guy our age. But
I'm only 42. I'm only 42.
Yeah, a little bit. He's the kid. Yeah.
Oh, that's so sad.
It's never good when the septic tank goes bad. I'm feeling really bad for Travis. So I know he's in up to his ankles out there. So.
Well, the problem was it was a septic tank we didn't know we had.
Wow.
So that was the core issue.
Yeah, that's like the definition of surprise.
Yeah.
Right there, so. Very good.
Well, that seems Mark, like a great way to end this interview, really.
Yeah. And it's ended. I'm sorry, Travis. Mark, I wanted to thank you so very much for spending that time with us and being so honest and revealing about what went on early on and your particular participation in the recumbent world. So it was wonderful having you on, and I appreciate it. I hope you'll stick around for a little bit as we kind of tie up the loose ends here.
Oh, sure. Thanks.
All righty. Okay, so as I said earlier, and we just discussed, Travis is going to hold off on the news until he can clean up his basement there and be back with us next month, hopefully with a complete report. So at this time, we're going to go to Denny, who does have a sports report for us. Let me switch on over to you, Denny. Go ahead.
Hey.
Denny, we lost you there. Are you there?
Oh yeah, I just muted me. Okay.
There we go. Unmute yourself.
I was so excited. It was good to see Mark. It's been way too long. It's been. I'll be down in Florida this winter. We'll have to get together. It'd really be good to see you. But I got a report here on the Natchez Trace, the 444-mile trail along beautiful Natchez Parkway. The trace is known as a 444-mile national park highway with limited access and strictly enforced 50-mile-per-hour speed limit, and no commercial trucks over a ton. The event is the brainchild of George Thomas of Colorado, and many of you may know George. He's been associated with endurance events for many years, and I met him first in 2012 when I worked as an official for Race Across America. He was the race director, and he also has a podcast called Over the Top Cycling, pretty much dedicated to cycling endurance events. And he was able to make this event to a reality. The start was on the northern end of the parkway near Franklin, Tennessee. The finish was 444 miles away in Natchez, Mississippi. There were 21 starters, including solos and teams, and the event had a 42-hour time limit to finish. Riders were started at 1-minute intervals, and the first one started at 6 p.m. local time. The weather was less than ideal, with a heavy overcast sky, mid-50-degree temperatures, and a light mist in the air. Among the starters were 4 recumbent riders, and I was involved with it. I was actually working crew for a friend of mine, and that's how I happened to be there. But a friend of mine is an upright rider, so it's just. But our race didn't go very well. The 4 recumbent guys that were there were Ben Tomlin of Florida on a cruise bike, Rod Owens from Alabama also on a cruise bike, Tim Odrzejewski on a Bacchetta Carbon Aero 2, and Gary Bierley, one half of Team Brody, testing out some miles on a prototype Carbent. Ben Tomlin finished in 27 hours. He was one of the early overall finishers. He did quite well. Gary Bierley's team, a mixed team with a recumbent and a diamond frame, in just 25 hours, and they were, I think, the first 2-man team, maybe second, but they did very, very well. Ben Tomlin finished. Rod Owens finished in 36 hours, and I believe it was his first endurance event. He's likely to be showing up to more in the next few years, so he looked pretty stoked to be there. And Tim Odrzejewski dropped after an upper respiratory issue, forced him out at the 300-mile point. So it was recumbents were well received in the parking lot prior to the race, and it was quite a bit of interest in the bikes and riders. Even though recumbents have been around for a while, it still seems that the endurance people are looking for a more comfortable ride. Coming up in October will be the No Country for Old Men 208, 383, and 1,000-mile race. And I heard from Dex Took, the owner of the race, that so far no recumbents have entered. So anybody's got a yen to do at least a 208, you'd be the only one there. But you'd be pretty much assured of a medal, that's for sure. He's really looking. He really would love to have a recumbent there too. By the way, I had a contact with him here in the last 24 hours, and he was asking about it. So, very good. So the Ultra Marathon Cycling Association Challenge Series concludes in November with the 6, 12, and 24-hour championship time trial challenges in Borrego Springs, California, on the week of November 13th. This final race is under the ownership of Fred and Rick Bottling, the owners of Race Across America. As with all ultra cycling events, I know recumbents are welcome to compete, and most generally encouraged to. That's what I have for this month. In the months to come, I hope to bring you the news and the stories pertaining to recumbents, racing, and ultra cycling. I myself have been racing 12-hour ultra marathon cycling challenge for the last 2 years, and as you may know, I do not currently race a recumbent, but a diamond frame bike. A lot of it has to do with sponsorship, but when that goes away, I'll probably be changing platforms. I do miss those darn recumbent bikes. If you have an event you think we should cover, please contact Gary or myself via the Bike Report or my email address, denny.voorhees@gmail.com. So next time, remember to stay on the bike, keep moving forward. Back to you, Gary.
You know, that's about as good advice I could imagine giving. So stay on the bike, keep moving forward. And that's what we're going to do as we wind up the Laidback Bike Report for October here. I want to just finish off with a few things from the Google Plus Recumbent bike community. We have 3 winners from the contest. Picture of the month, Peter Kelly won. The title of the picture was "She is My Dream Bike." The video of the month, Ian Fardo won the Hyperlapse Velomobile Commute. That's a wild-looking video. If you have a chance to see that, you might want to look at it. And the discussion of the month was John Rossignol talking about the most interesting bent rider in the world. So you might want to check those out on the Google Plus Recumbent Bike Rider community. You can see all those right there. The community has hit 712 members. That's grown quite a bit from last month. We thank you for joining there. And I've just recently updated the locator map, so if you are on the community and you want to let everyone know where you are riding so you can join up with other members, please go to the upper right-hand corner of the community board there and click on the link there for adding your name to the locator map, and we will put you right on. All right, let's talk about the future. Next month, November 1st, it'll be the first Sunday and the first day of November. That will be the next Laidback Bike Report. Our special guest will be Peter Stull of the Bicycle Man and also Linear Bikes. Met Peter at the Recumbent CycleCon a couple weeks ago. Very interesting guy. Lots of good stories. We're going to have a bunch of pictures again and try to coordinate those. So we'll look forward to talking to Peter next month. So if you'd like to become a panelist or be a guest on our show, please contact me. We will talk to you and see if we can't get you on. I wanted to thank each of our panel members today. Carl, wonderful job on the pictures. That wasn't easy, and at the last minute, I appreciate it. Denny, great report on sports for the first time around. We'll be looking forward to more of those. And Travis, we know you'll get yourself sorted out there and de-stinkified shortly, I'm sure. So glad you stuck around and helped us out. Appreciate that. And
mostly I'm just glad that this is archived forever. That's really what I'm happy about.
That's right. And our very special guest this time around, Mark Colliton. Thank you for joining us and being part of the Laidback Bike Report this month. Appreciate it, Mark. So that should do it. We do want to especially thank, I almost forgot, Brian Ball and Bent Rider for announcing this on their blog today. That really helps us out. So we thank you, Brian. And a little hint here, I wasn't going to announce it just yet, but Brian actually will be on the show in December, our holiday show. We'll have some sort of big extravaganza, and if Brian Ball is on the show, you know it's going to be something special. So we look forward to having Brian on in December. So if you support what we do here on Laidback Bike Report, we would appreciate it if you'd like us on Facebook. If you would subscribe to our YouTube channel, you'll see a little red subscribe button in the lower right-hand corner of every video that's on there. Click that and subscribe. That helps us out. And if you're really crazy about us, head to the website, hit the donate button, and send us a few bucks we can use for promotion. And I got to pay my wife for this beautiful quilt that she made behind me. She spent a lot of money putting that together and a lot of time. So, and I appreciate it. I haven't thanked her for that yet. Thank you, Marilyn. So there you go. That's pretty much it. If you want to head to the website at any time, see our past or shows and what's coming in the future, laidbackbikereport.com. So until next time, thank you from all of us here at the Laidback Bike Report. So long, Bent Riders.